The tires of the rented sedan crunched on the familiar gravel driveway of the house I hadn't truly called home in 20 years. Maple Ridge. The name itself felt like a sigh trapped in my chest. Picturesque, sleepy, and now suffocating under the weight of grief and unresolved tension. My father, Dr. Robert Prescott, retired Army colonel and the town's steadfast physician for decades, was gone. A sudden heart attack, swift and merciless, leaving behind a silence that echoed louder than any artillery fire he'd ever faced. I switched off the ignition, the engine's dying hum replaced by the chirping of unseen birds and the distant whine of a lawnmower. Home. Or rather, the house where my stepmother, Mary Ann, now resided alone. At 45, I, Dr. Elena Prescott, navigated the controlled chaos of a Level 1 trauma center in Chicago. Broken bodies, split-second decisions, the metallic tang of blood. That was my reality. Compared to the raw, messy business of saving lives, the sterile quiet of Maple Ridge felt alien, unnerving. My charcoal gray suit felt too stiff, my briefcase too urban for this setting. Mary Ann met me at the door, enveloped in a cloud of lilac perfume that always seemed too sweet, too deliberate. Her carefully arranged blonde hair didn't have a single strand out of place, and her black dress, though appropriate, looked expensive, new. There were tears, of course, welling up in her pale blue eyes as she drew me into an embrace that felt both fragile and oddly possessive. "Elena, darling, I'm so glad you're here. It's been unbearable." Her voice trembled, but the grip on my arms was firm. "I came as soon as I could arrange cover, Mary Ann," I replied, gently extracting myself. My own grief felt like a cold, hard knot deep inside, something clinical and contained, unlike her more performative sorrow. We'd never been close. She'd married my father when I was already in college, a whirlwind romance after my mother's long illness. Mary Ann was younger, vivacious then, full of plans to redecorate the sturdy, slightly old-fashioned house my father loved. I'd always kept a polite distance, sensing a core of calculation beneath the charm. She ushered me inside. The house smelled different, still faintly of Dad's pipe tobacco and old books, but overlaid now with Mary Ann's aggressive floral scents and lemon polish. She'd certainly put her stamp on it. New rugs, different paintings on the walls, a general air of glossiness that felt foreign. "Everything's arranged for the reading tomorrow morning," Mary Ann said, gesturing towards the living room where a portrait of my father, stern and kind in his uniform, hung above the fireplace. "Mr. Davies will be here at 10. Davies. Her lawyer, not Dad's longtime solicitor, Mr. Abernathy. Another small flag, barely registering at the time. "Fine," I said, needing space. "I think I'll just take my bags up to my old room." "Of course, dear." Rest. It's been a long drive. Her solicitude felt like sandpaper against raw nerves. As I climbed the familiar creaking stairs, a flicker of memory surfaced. A phone call a few months back. Dad's voice, slightly hesitant. "Elena, just wanted to chat. Make sure things are clear, about arrangements, you know." I'd been rushing between surgeries, distracted. "Everything's fine, Dad, don't worry," I'd said dismissively. "We'll talk properly next time I'm down." There hadn't been a next time. What things had he wanted to make clear? The thought lodged itself like a splinter beneath my calm exterior. Upstairs, my old room was preserved as if in amber, though subtly Mary Ann'd. New curtains, a different duvet cover. I dropped my overnight bag and briefcase, walked to the window overlooking the sprawling backyard my father had meticulously maintained. Something felt off. Not just the grief, but a discordant note beneath the surface of Marianne's practiced sympathy. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to S. Sarah Jenkins, attorney at law. My personal lawyer in Chicago, sharp as a scalpel, retained for years to handle my own affairs. Contracts, property, the occasional professional liability query. Instinct, honed by years of diagnosing hidden injuries, told me to have her on standby. I wouldn't call yet, not until after the reading, but the impulse itself was a warning. I took a deep breath, forcing the surgeon's composure back into place. Tomorrow. I would deal with whatever tomorrow brought. The next morning arrived draped in the oppressive humidity of a Maple Ridge summer. 10 o'clock found me seated stiffly in one of my father's leather armchairs in the study, the scent of old books and his pipe tobacco a painful reminder. Marianne sat opposite, dabbing her eyes with a lace-trimmed handkerchief. Between us sat Mr. Davies, Marianne's lawyer, a man whose suit looked a little too slick for this small town, his briefcase gleaming expensively. He cleared his throat, shuffling papers with an air of practiced solemnity. "We are gathered," he began, his voice smooth, perhaps too smooth, "to execute the last will and testament of Colonel Dr. Robert Prescott." He droned on through the legal preamble, his words blurring into a monotonous buzz. My focus sharpened only when he reached the disposition of assets. "To my beloved wife, Marianne Prescott, I bequeath the entirety of my residential property located at 12 Oak Street, Maple Ridge, including all furnishings and contents therein." My breath caught. "The house, everything in it." He continued, "Furthermore, my primary investment portfolio, held at Maple Ridge Financial, and the contents of my savings account, number ending 734, are also bequeathed solely to my wife, Marianne." The room tilted slightly. The bulk of the estate. Everything of significant monetary value. I felt a cold stillness spread through me, the kind that precedes a critical diagnosis. What was left for me? Davies cleared his throat again, looking down at the final paragraphs. "And to my daughter, Dr. Elena Prescott, I leave my collection of antique medical instruments, my service medals, and the grandfather clock located in the upstairs hallway, in recognition of our shared profession and her service. Sentimental items, valuable in their own way, yes, but compared to the house, the portfolio, it was a pittance. It made no sense." Dad had always been meticulously fair, almost obsessively so. He'd often spoken of ensuring I was secure, independent of my own substantial earnings. This felt wrong. Utterly wrong. Marianne produced a fresh wave of delicate sobs. "Oh, Robert. So generous, she always took such care of me." Davies offered her a sympathetic smile before turning to me, his expression carefully neutral. "Dr. Prescott, if you have any questions—" "No," I managed, my voice tight. "Thank you, Mr. Davies." That was very clear. As Davies packed his briefcase, making murmured condolences to Marianne, she turned to me, her eyes still damp. "Elena, dear, before you go, there's that lovely photo of you and your father on the mantelpiece. The one from your medical school graduation. I thought you might like to take it with you now." She gestured towards it, her voice dripping with false generosity. Something about her eagerness, the way she specifically pointed it out, pinged a warning bell deep inside. Playing along, I walked to the fireplace. The photo was in a heavy silver frame Dad had cherished. As I lifted it, my fingers brushed against the backing. It felt uneven. Excusing myself to the hallway for a moment, ostensibly to compose myself, I quickly turned the frame over. Tucked tightly behind the faded velvet backing, almost invisible against the dark material, was a small, folded piece of paper. My heart hammered against my ribs. With trembling fingers, I unfolded it. Dad's handwriting. Instantly recognizable, though slightly shaky. The message was brief, urgent. Elena, trust no documents presented by M. She intends to erase you as heir and has already begun moving assets. Check the study, piano. Protocol Nightingale. Dad. The blood rushed from my head. Erase me, moving assets. Protocol Nightingale. Our old code. From childhood games of spies, meaning emergency plan, immediate action required, trust no one outside. He knew. He'd suspected, or known, what she was planning. The cryptic phone call suddenly blazed with significance. I folded the note carefully, slipping it into my jacket pocket, the paper burning against my skin. My surgeon's mask of composure slammed back into place, colder, harder than before. I walked back into the study. "Thank you, Marianne," I said, my voice unnervingly steady as I picked up the framed photo. "It's a lovely memory." "Of course, dear," she beamed, relief flooding her features, mistaking my control for acceptance. I needed to leave. Now. "I should get back on the road," I said curtly, grabbing my briefcase. "Long drive." "Oh. So soon?" Her surprise seemed genuine for a second before the mask slipped back. "Well, drive carefully, darling, and do keep in touch." "I will," I lied. Outside, the humid air felt thick, cloying. I got into the rental car, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The moment I was out of sight of the house, I pulled over onto the shoulder of the quiet country road, the engine idling. My hands were shaking now. I pulled out my phone, speed dialing Sarah Jenkins. She answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and professional. "Sarah Jenkins." "Sarah, it's Elena Prescott." My voice was low, tight with suppressed fury. "We have a situation. A serious one. Activate everything we discussed for contingency planning. I think my stepmother is committing fraud on a massive scale." There was a brief pause, then Sarah's voice sharpened with focus. "Understood, Elena. Tell me everything. Start from the beginning." And I did. The will reading, the paltry inheritance, Marianne's lawyer, the photograph, the note. Protocol Nightingale. Protocol Nightingale, Sarah repeated, her voice sharp with understanding. "Right. Your father set up contingency phrases years ago, after that colleague of his got taken to the cleaners in his divorce. Smart man. Okay, Elena, stay calm. Do exactly what the note says. Search the study and the piano. Document everything. Photos, notes. Don't touch original documents more than necessary. I'm initiating legal protocols on my end. We need concrete proof." Disconnecting the call, I felt a cold clarity descend. Grief was a luxury I couldn't afford right now. This was triage. Stop the bleeding, assess the damage, plan the intervention. I slipped back into the house through the unlocked side door. Marianne must have assumed I was long gone. The silence felt heavy, charged. Dad's study was my first target. It hadn't changed much over the years. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves crammed with medical texts and history volumes, his worn leather desk chair, the faint, comforting scent of pipe tobacco clinging to the upholstery. It felt like trespassing on sacred ground, but the note compelled me forward. "Protocol Nightingale," I murmured, recalling childhood whispers and elaborate imaginary missions. What would Dad hide and where? I started with the obvious, the desk drawers. Locked. Of course. But I knew where Dad kept the spare keys. A small carved wooden box disguised as a book on the third shelf. Inside, nestled amongst old coins and cufflinks, was the small brass key. The top drawer yielded mostly stationery and old patient files. Ethically, I averted my eyes. The bottom drawer held personal finances, tax returns, old checkbooks, and then, tucked beneath a stack of bank statements from their main joint account, I found it. A thick, sealed manila envelope addressed to me in Dad's handwriting, marked, Personal Confidential E. Prescott only. My hands trembled slightly as I slid it open. Inside were photocopies of bank statements for several investment accounts and a high-yield savings account, all solely in my father's name initially, then transferred to my name as sole beneficiary nearly 10 years ago. Clear documentation, notarized. Following these were statements from the last 6 months, showing a systematic transfer of funds out of these accounts into the joint account Marianne now controlled, and then further transfers out of that joint account to another one I didn't recognize. The amount started small, then escalated rapidly in the last 90 days, tens of thousands of dollars, siphoned away. But there was more. Tucked deeper in the envelope were receipts. Not for household expenses, but from a local antique dealer and an online auction house. Dated over the last 3 months. Listed items included Dad's prized collection of maritime navigation instruments, a rare first edition medical text, and even my grandmother's silver tea set. All marked as donated for charitable tax receipt or sold, proceeds to joint account. Marianne hadn't just been moving liquid assets. She'd been selling off irreplaceable family heirlooms under the guise of tidying and downsizing, pocketing or hiding the proceeds. Bile rose in my throat. Finally, I found several printouts, email inquiries Marianne had sent from Dad's computer, she must have known his password, to a financial advisor, asking about the process of accessing funds in accounts where the primary holder was incapacitated or recently deceased, specifically mentioning bypassing secondary beneficiaries, and worse, printouts of web searches. Declaring spouse mentally incompetent, power of attorney requirements, contesting a will based on diminished capacity. She hadn't just planned to grab the money after his death. She'd been setting the stage, possibly even considering ways to gain control while he was still alive, should his health have declined slowly. The cold-blooded calculation of it stole my breath. I meticulously photographed every document with my phone, uploading them immediately to a secure cloud drive Sarah had set up. As I finished, my phone buzzed. It was Sarah. "Elena, I've got something," she said, her voice tight. "I had my paralegal do a discreet check." That lawyer, Davies, he made inquiries, very hypothetically, of course, with the county clerk's office just last month about the specific legal requirements and timelines for petitioning the court to declare a spouse mentally unfit to manage their financial affairs due to cognitive decline or undue stress. The final piece clicked into place. It wasn't just about the inheritance after death. She was exploring ways to seize control even before he died, using my demanding career as potential proof of my instability if I contested. The audacity was staggering. "She wasn't just waiting for him to die, Sarah," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "She was potentially planning to sideline me even if he'd lived but become incapacitated, and she's liquidating everything valuable." "Okay," Sarah said, her voice all business now. "That strengthens the case for fraud and undue influence significantly. Now, the piano. What did the note say about the piano?" Remembering the note's instruction, I moved to the formal living room. The old upright piano stood in the corner, a relic from my mother's time. Dad had kept it tuned, though Marianne never played. It was mostly a surface for displaying photographs, including, ironically, the one I now held, its secret safely in my pocket. I approached it cautiously. Where would Dad hide something? I ran my hands along the polished wood, checking for loose panels or unusual seams. Nothing obvious. Then I remembered Dad tinkering with it about a year ago, complaining about a buzzing sound. He'd had a technician come out. Or had he? Kneeling, I peered into the dimly lit space behind the lower front panel, near the pedals. Taped securely to the inner framework, almost invisible against the dark wood and felt, was a small black square, a Wi-Fi-enabled security camera, lens pointing outwards towards the main seating area. Tiny, discreet, easily missed unless you were specifically looking for it. My pulse quickened. How to access the footage. The note. Protocol Nightingale. Nightingale. Dad's favorite bird. He'd once set up a bird feeder camera, and the password involved the scientific name, Lucinia megarincos. A long shot, but worth trying. I connected my phone to the camera's faint Wi-Fi signal, opened the generic security app interface it prompted, and typed in the complex password. Access granted. The app loaded a cloud storage interface. Files dated back nearly 8 months. My breath hitched. I tapped on a recent file, dated just 2 weeks before Dad died. The camera's perspective was fixed, showing the sofa and armchairs opposite the piano. The audio was surprisingly clear. Marianne was on the sofa, talking animatedly with Mr. Davies, the lawyer. So the updated will leaves the bulk to me, that's settled, Marianne was saying, swirling a glass of wine. But Elena, she's a surgeon, high stress, you know. If she contests, claims undue influence. Davies leaned forward, his voice conspiratorial. That's where we preemptively gather documentation. Any instances of her seeming overwhelmed? Missing family events due to work? We can subtly suggest the pressure is getting to her, making her judgment unreliable, especially if she questions your management of the estate. My blood ran cold. They were planning to paint me as unstable. Marianne nodded eagerly. Exactly. And Robert's little Nightingale accounts. He mentioned them once, vaguely. We need to ensure those are fully consolidated into the main joint account before she can get wind of them. That's why the auction is crucial. Liquidate the tangibles quickly. Turn everything into cash under my control. Davies smirked. The estate auction is scheduled for 3 days from now. Perfectly timed. By the time she digests the will reading, the most valuable items will be gone, funds transferred. A fait accompli. They discussed specific valuable items, Dad's antique chronometer, a signed letter from a historical medical figure, confirming the receipts I'd found. The casual way they plotted the disposal of my family's history, reducing it to cash for Marianne's benefit, was sickening. I saved the footage, my hands shaking with rage this time, not shock. As I was backing out of the app, my phone rang again. Sarah. Elena, confirmation, she said, her voice grim. I checked with the life insurance company. Your father had a substantial policy, originally naming you as the sole beneficiary. 6 weeks ago, someone attempted to change the beneficiary to Marianne. It required signatures from both your father and you as the existing primary beneficiary. The request was submitted with your father's signature, which looked shaky, possibly forged or coerced, but lacked yours. The change was rejected. Marianne tried to push it, claiming you were unavailable due to work commitments, but the company held firm on policy. 6 weeks ago, while Dad was still alive, she hadn't just planned, she had acted, trying to cut me out even then, trying to steal the safety net Dad had meticulously built for me. The sheer, calculated greed of it was breathtaking. She tried to change the life insurance, Sarah, I relayed, the words tasting like ash. 6 weeks ago, failed because she needed my signature. Jesus, Sarah breathed. Okay, Elena, we have more than enough. Forgery, conspiracy to commit fraud, undue influence, documented intent to defraud an heir, attempted interference with insurance policy. This is slam dunk territory. Get out of the house. Now. Go somewhere safe, preferably out of town. I'm filing the emergency injunction immediately to freeze everything. Accounts, property, the auction, everything. I'm on my way out now, I confirmed, my voice low and clipped. The surgeon's focus was absolute. Send me the address of a secure location. I'll drive straight there. Already sent. A discreet corporate rental suite in Bedford Hills about an hour north. Check your encrypted messages, Sarah replied instantly. I've drafted the emergency injunction petition. Citing fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, undue influence, conversion of assets, attempted insurance fraud, and requesting an immediate freeze on all known assets belonging to Robert Prescott's estate, any joint accounts held with Elena Prescott, any accounts Elena Prescott holds solely, and specifically halting the estate auction scheduled in 3 days. I'm citing the risk of irreparable harm and flight risk, given the evidence of asset liquidation and deception. I'll file it electronically within the hour and push for an expedited hearing, hopefully tomorrow or the day after. Good. The footage from the piano camera is uploading to the secure drive now. It explicitly shows Marianne and Davies plotting to liquidate assets via the auction and discussing ways to discredit me. I added, backing carefully out of the driveway, checking my mirrors not just for traffic, but for any sign of Marianne's car. Paranoia felt like prudence now. Excellent. That's the nail in the coffin for the auction and likely Davies' career, Sarah said with grim satisfaction. The life insurance attempt is powerful evidence of prior intent. The bank records show the systematic drain. Your father's note establishes his awareness and fear. Elena, this is strong. Very strong. Make it airtight, Sarah. I want her stopped, completely. The cold fury hadn't dissipated. It had solidified into diamond-hard resolve. Consider it done, Sarah assured me. Now drive carefully, stay off main highways if possible, and don't contact anyone else. I'll handle all communications from here. The hour-long drive north to Bedford Hills passed in a blur of focused tension. I drove under the speed limit, took secondary roads, my eyes constantly scanning. The anonymity of the corporate rental suite was a relief, clean, impersonal, secure. I double-locked the door, drew the blinds, and finally allowed myself a moment to breathe, the enormity of the betrayal washing over me again. My own father's wife, plotting to erase me, to steal not just money, but memories, history, selling off pieces of our lives while smiling sweetly. Sarah called back later that evening. Filed, she announced. The court clerk confirmed receipt. Given the severity of the allegations and the supporting evidence previews I attached, particularly the conspiracy footage and the insurance fraud attempt, they've granted an expedited hearing for tomorrow afternoon. Judge Eleanor Vance presiding. She has zero tolerance for financial exploitation, especially of elders or bereaved families. The temporary restraining order freezing the assets and halting the auction is granted, pending the hearing. A process server is en route to serve Marianne and Davies notice right now. A wave of relief washed over me, quickly followed by grim anticipation. So tomorrow, it begins. Tomorrow we start taking it all back, Sarah corrected firmly. Get some rest, Elena. You'll need to be sharp. Rest was elusive. I spent the night reviewing the evidence I'd gathered, cross-referencing bank statements with the auction items Marianne and Davies had discussed. The cold, hard facts, a stark contrast to the warm memories associated with those objects. Each piece sold felt like a personal violation. Sleep, when it finally came, was shallow and dreamless. The community hall rented for the estate auction of Colonel Dr. Robert Prescott was buzzing with morbid curiosity and bargain hunters the next afternoon. Word had gotten around town about the prominent doctor's passing and the subsequent sell-off. Through the tinted windows of Sarah's car, parked discreetly across the street, I watched people mill about, examining lots laid out on long tables, silverware, paintings, antique furniture, Dad's collection of ship models. My stomach tightened. Marianne was flitting amongst the crowd, dressed in elegant gray, playing the grieving but stoic widow perfectly. She conferred occasionally with a flustered-looking auctioneer and Mr. Davies, who hovered nearby, attempting an air of professional oversight but looking pale around the gills. He must have been served last night. Did Marianne know yet? Her confident demeanor suggested not, or perhaps she thought she could still brazen it out. "Showtime," Sarah murmured beside me, checking her watch. "The court official with the signed injunction order is meeting us at the entrance in 2 minutes. Ready?" I nodded, smoothing the front of my dark blue pantsuit. My hands were steady, my pulse even. The pre-surgery calm had settled over me. This was just another procedure, albeit a different kind. Excising a malignancy. We exited the car as a uniformed court official approached. Sarah exchanged brief words, handed him a copy of the order, and the three of us walked purposefully towards the hall entrance just as the auctioneer banged his gavel. "Lot number 1, ladies and gentlemen, a fine Georgian silver tea service, circa 1790. "Excuse me?" The court official's voice cut through the auctioneer's patter, firm and authoritative. He strode to the makeshift podium, Sarah and I following a step behind. "This auction is hereby suspended by order of the Maple Ridge County Court." A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Heads turned. The auctioneer gaped, gavel frozen mid-air. Marianne, standing near the front, spun around, her eyes widening first in irritation, then dawning horror as she saw me standing beside Sarah and the official. Davies looked like he might faint. The official held up the document. "A temporary restraining order has been issued, freezing all assets related to the estate of Robert Prescott and prohibiting any sale or transfer pending a court hearing regarding allegations of fraud and undue influence." Marianne found her voice, high-pitched and laced with panic. "What is the meaning of this? This is outrageous." "My husband wanted—" "Your husband," I interrupted, stepping forward, my voice calm but carrying clearly in the sudden silence, "wanted his actual last wishes respected." I held up a clear plastic sleeve containing a certified copy of the beneficiary documents Dad had hidden for me. Documents naming me, his daughter, as the primary beneficiary of his significant assets, notarized 10 years ago. Gasps erupted. Marianne's face went sheet white. "Furthermore," I continued, my gaze locking with hers, "we have evidence of unauthorized disposal of valuable estate assets before this illegal auction." I gestured vaguely towards the items laid out. Receipts for donations and private sales conveniently benefiting Marianne Prescott. Davies started to sputter. "Now see here, this is highly irregular." Sarah stepped forward, sharp and precise. "What's irregular, Mr. Davies is attempting to change a life insurance beneficiary form using a questionable signature, failing because you lacked the co-beneficiary's consent." She let that hang in the air for a moment. "Or conspiring to fabricate evidence of mental instability against my client to discredit her rightful claim." This time, the gasps were louder. Marianne swayed, clutching Davies's arm for support. "And perhaps most pertinent to today's proceedings," I said, pulling out my tablet, "is this." I turned the screen towards Marianne and Davies, hitting play on the saved video file from the piano camera. Their voices filled the stunned silence, plotting the auction, discussing how to handle me, planning the rapid liquidation. Marianne stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing silently, the color completely drained from her face. Davies looked physically ill. Around us, the crowd was silent, faces a mixture of shock and avid interest. Several people, clearly local journalists tipped off by the court filing, were already recording on their phones, capturing Marianne's public downfall in real time. The court official cleared his throat. "Mrs. Prescott, Mr. Davies, you were served notice of these proceedings and the hearing scheduled. Given this new evidence presented, I suggest you cooperate fully with the authorities." He nodded towards two uniformed police officers who had quietly entered the hall and were now approaching Marianne and Davies. Marianne finally looked directly at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief, hatred, and raw panic. The carefully constructed facade had shattered, revealing the grasping avarice beneath. I held her gaze for a beat, letting her see the utter absence of emotion on my face. No triumph, no anger, just the cold, clinical finality of a necessary excision. Then, I turned away. Sarah stepped forward to confer quietly with the police officers and the court official, presenting copies of the injunction and evidence summaries. The crowd began to disperse, murmuring excitedly, casting curious glances back at the scene unfolding. Marianne, white-faced and trembling, trying to argue with the impassive officers. Davies, sweating profusely, attempting futilely to intervene on her behalf before seeming to shrink into himself. I didn't wait to see them escorted away. My part in the public confrontation was done. The rest was legal procedure, paperwork, the slow grinding of the justice system. I walked out of the hall, head held high, ignoring the reporters who tried to approach me with questions. I got into Sarah's waiting car, the engine already running. "Handled," Sarah said, sliding into the driver's seat a few minutes later, her expression grimly satisfied. "They're being taken in for questioning regarding conspiracy to commit fraud, potential elder financial abuse charges too, given the timing and methods." Davies looked like his career flashed before his eyes. He might cooperate to save his skin. "Good," I said quietly, looking out at the Maple Ridge streets I suddenly couldn't wait to leave behind again. "What happens now?" "Now, we secure the estate," Sarah explained as she pulled away from the curb. "The injunction prevents any further transactions. We'll have the court appoint an independent administrator, likely tomorrow, to inventory everything properly. We present our full evidence at the formal hearing, which, given what happened today, should be straightforward. The original beneficiary designations are clear, the fraud attempt is documented, the conspiracy is on tape. Marianne's claim will be dismissed, the will she presented likely declared invalid due to undue influence or fraud. Restitution for the items she already sold will be sought." "And her Marianne?" Sarah sighed. "Criminal charges are probable, though white-collar crimes can be complex to prosecute fully. At the very least, she'll lose everything she tried to steal, face civil penalties, and her reputation here is ruined. Davies will likely face disbarment proceedings. It wasn't about vengeance, not entirely. It was about justice for my father, about protecting what he intended, about stopping the calculated destruction of his legacy and my inheritance. Marianne's fate was a consequence of her actions." I felt no pity, only a weary sense of closure. "Take me back to the rental suite, Sarah," I said. "I need to pack. I want to be out of this town by morning." "Understood," she replied, glancing at me with professional concern. "You handled that remarkably well, Elena, like a surgeon in the OR." "Sometimes," I murmured, watching the familiar landmarks blur past, "you just have to cut away the diseased tissue." 2 months later, the late summer sun warmed my face as I sat on the deck of a rustic but comfortable cabin overlooking a tranquil lake in northern Michigan. The air smelled of pine needles and damp earth, a welcome antidote to Chicago's exhaust fumes and the lingering bitterness of Maple Ridge. This place, I'd discovered through the estate settlement process, was the Nightingale Trust property. Dad had bought it quietly years ago, putting it in trust for me, another layer of his contingency planning. He'd never mentioned it, perhaps wanting it to be a surprise, a true sanctuary should I ever need one. I needed one now. The legal battle had concluded as swiftly and decisively as Sarah predicted. Faced with the irrefutable evidence, Marianne's lawyer had quickly advised her to concede defeat in the civil case regarding the estate. The will she presented was invalidated. My father's original intentions, documented years prior, were upheld. The house in Maple Ridge, the remaining investments, the insurance payout, all were rightfully mine. Restitution was ordered for the antiques and heirlooms Marianne had managed to sell before the injunction, though recovering the full value would likely be a long process. Marianne herself had accepted a plea deal on lesser fraud charges to avoid a potentially lengthy trial, and harsher sentence on conspiracy and elder abuse counts. She received probation and a significant restitution order she'd likely be paying off for the rest of her life. Last I heard, through town gossip relayed reluctantly by Mr. Abernathy, Dad's original, now reinstated solicitor, she had left Maple Ridge in disgrace, staying with a distant relative somewhere out west. Davies had surrendered his law license. I swirled the amber liquid in my glass, a single malt Dad would have appreciated. Spread on the small wooden table beside me were the final papers from Sarah, closing out the estate administration. Title deeds transferred, accounts settled, taxes paid, a thick black line drawn under a painful chapter. I'd taken an extended leave of absence from the hospital. The adrenaline rush of trauma surgery suddenly felt less appealing than the quiet lapping of waves against the shore. I needed time to process, to grieve not just for my father, but for the trust that had been so cynically violated. My phone buzzed softly on the table. An email notification. Glancing down, I saw the subject line. Offer of position, Head of Surgical Research, Lakeside Medical Institute. A prestigious offer, one I might have jumped at months ago. Interesting work, less frantic hours, a chance to shape research. I smiled faintly, acknowledged the potential, the path forward it represented, but I didn't open it immediately. Instead, I set the phone aside, screen down. For the first time in what felt like forever, no emergencies were demanding my attention, no hidden agendas to uncover, no betrayals lurking beneath pleasant facades. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the deck, painting the lake in hues of gold and rose. A loon called out, its haunting cry echoing across the water. I leaned back in the Adirondack chair, breathing the clean, cool air deeply. The peace was profound, settling into my bones. This cabin, this lake, this quiet was the real inheritance my father had left me. Not just assets, but the chance for a life reclaimed, a future lived entirely on my terms. The sunset was magnificent, and for the first time since that gravel driveway crunched under my tires 2 months ago, I felt completely, utterly free. As the last rays of sun painted the lake fire, Elena drew a final deep breath of the pine-scented air. The tranquility wasn't just the absence of city noise or hospital alarms, but the hard-won silence after a storm of deceit. Maple Ridge had taught her a brutal, invaluable lesson, one etched deeper than any surgical scar. That betrayal often wears the mask of affection, and greed can fester silently for years beneath a veneer of normalcy. It underscored the chilling truth that sometimes the greatest dangers aren't the sudden traumas you face head-on, but the slow, calculated erosion of trust from those closest to you. Vigilance, she now knew, wasn't paranoia. It was necessary armor in a world where foundations could crumble without warning. But it also taught her that truth, pursued with clear eyes and steady hands, could cut through the deepest rot. And the peace found on the other side, the quiet ownership of one's life, was the only inheritance truly worth fighting for.